Hi, Seraphin here. There are a remarkable number of things we can do with flour and water. And in this video, we're going to deal with 3 of them. So first, we could simply mix the flour and water together, add a bit of salt, toss in some instant yeast, develop its gluten network to transform it from an aqueous mixture into an elastic, cohesive, and stretchable dough that traps gas bubbles. And baguettes, pizzas, pita breads, just to name a few, are notable examples of lean breads made of such a dough. Second, we can boil water and then quickly mix it with flour, making a gelatinized starch and later on incorporating it into our final dough to make a soft, naturally sweeter, and moister bread that stays fresh and lasts longer. Tangzhong or Yudane, whichever you'd like to call it, we're just going to call it Tangzhong here. Third, we can take that flour and water mixture and over a series of backslopping or refreshments day after day for at least 5 to 7 days, develop it into a lively culture of microorganisms, mostly yeast and lactic acid bacteria. That we call a sourdough starter, or a traditional sourdough starter to be exact. Using this mature sourdough starter, we can then make it into Levain, and later on we can use the Levain to leaven our dough, a long process that rewards us with healthier and tastier breads. Lately, we've been baking a lot of soft, tasty, and healthy breads with the 3 in the mix. We've been playing with the composition and ratio of the 2 main derivative ingredients, Tangzhong and sourdough, using this recipe. We started with buns without baker's yeast, a sourdough bread with 20% Levain, and another one with Tangzhong 10% added. We got these beautiful breads with a fine, soft crumb, among other pleasant and distinct sensory attributes, not to mention the extra flavors from the mozzarella topping and other finishing touches that we added to the final breads. Everything was fine except for one thing. We couldn't really subjectively tell if there were any differences between the 2. So we upped the flour that we used for the Tangzhong to 20% baker's percentage, Tangzhong 20, and to balance the flour used in the gelatinized dough, we also raised the Levain to 30%, which practically means 15% of the flour. If you've been paying attention, you may have noticed that the derivative ingredients now constitute a great portion of the baker's percentage. As explained in our previous video on Tangzhong and sourdough, while they have been proven pretty fantastic on their own, both of them have negative impacts on the rheology of the dough, especially in terms of tolerance to kneading. So we have a double whammy situation here, which leads us to a variety of questions that need to be addressed. Like, what is the point of adding both of these derivative ingredients? Isn't either one enough? If we were to proceed, would the benefits outweigh the troubles we have to go through? And how are we going to do that? Tangzhong is probably the place to start. To make one thing clear, adding gelatinized starch to bread is highly beneficial. It makes the bread sweeter, it makes the bread easier to chew, softer, and it gives the bread an awesome mochi taste. It also helps prevent the dough from getting too wet or sticky, since it allows the dough to act as if it's at a lower hydration than it really is. But gelatinized starch does affect the dough and volume of the bread. More likely to come apart when you knead it too much, and bread made with higher amounts of Tangzhong do suffer in terms of volume. They end up with a lower specific volume. Now, to this interesting situation with Tangzhong, we add the super beneficial sourdough fermentation. Sourdough bread is the oldest kind of leavened bread, and it has so many benefits from health to texture and flavor. It really does improve practically every aspect of bread making. When we added it to Tangzhong, we get a very interesting hybrid with a lot of the benefits from both. One of the benefits is an enhanced taste from both methods, and the other is that it allows us to make a softer sourdough bread. In combining sourdough and Tangzhong, we hope to reap many of these sourdough benefits along with the ones from gelatinized starch. But it isn't all smooth sailing. There are challenges to working with a dough containing both Tangzhong and sourdough. The main issue is how they can interfere with the gluten-starch matrix and thus dough strength and cohesion. This is a dough made purely with a sourdough starter and Tangzhong. As you can see, it's literally incapable of holding itself together. This is likely to be mainly a result of leaving the dough for too long. The enzymes in the flour have no doubt broken down a lot of the gluten, and the acids and microorganisms from the sourdough starter are definitely contributing to that breakdown. This breakdown is what has contributed to the flavor of many a delicious bread, but in this case, it went way too far. Probably doesn't help that gelatinized starch definitely interferes with the gluten in enough amounts, which is how we used it. So we have what's like a perfect storm situation, and we need a solution. That's where instant yeast steps in. Even the best sourdough starters have a hard time competing with instant yeast in terms of proliferation and activity. A lot of the main letdowns of using instant yeast in bread, though, is because it speeds up fermentation so much that it loses the chance to build flavor and improve the texture of the bread. Baker's yeast alone, while very prolific, is unfortunately just inadequate in many things. Thankfully, we've got our sourdough and Tangzhong to cover this problem. Flavor and texture improvers of gold class standard. Sourdough also improves gas retention, but not gas production in bread dough, which is of course something that instant yeast is absolutely fantastic at. We expect the improvement in gas retention of the dough due to the sourdough to be sufficient in overcoming this detrimental part of using Tangzhong. And the instant yeast helps the problem with the dough tremendously. By speeding up fermentation, we don't subject the dough to as long of a proteolytic breakdown by the enzymes in the flour and from the sourdough's inhabitants, preventing it from going all the way to the dough we saw before, completely unable to hold itself together. We don't need too much instant yeast, just a little bit to speed the process along. This speed will also prevent the buildup of too much acid in the dough. And of course, we're also going to get a very nice and quick bread recipe, which is always nice for days when you don't have so much time, but you do really want some bread. With this combination of the three, you can have a pretty fast, delicious, and soft bread recipe that honestly makes for perfect burger buns and sandwiches. So let's get to the actual recipe then. We're starting with making the Tangzhong by pouring 100 grams of boiling water into a small bowl. Then we add 50 grams of bread flour into it, and immediately after that, we want to mix it all together with this small wooden rolling pin, just making sure all the flour gets mixed in with the hot water. Make sure to be careful not to burn yourself. Once it's well mixed, our Tangzhong is actually basically done, but to get the best out of it, we need to put it in the fridge overnight to retrograde. Side by side, these are 2 bowls of Tangzhong we've made. The one on the left was just made, and the other one was placed in the fridge overnight to retrograde. As you can see, they do look a little different. The rest time influences much more than just appearance though, and in fact, the one left overnight can make our bread sweeter, which is part of why we let it retrograde. Okay, so after the Tangzhong is done resting and ready, we're going to make the Levain. Using a mature sourdough starter that we've had for a good while now and has starred in some of our previous videos, we're going to combine 40 grams of water, 20 grams of the starter, and 40 grams of bread flour inside a glass container. We'll mix it very well, it shouldn't take much time at all. And then we're going to leave a rubber band on it to mark its original height before covering it and leaving it to rise. This took about 6 hours at 29 degrees Celsius for the Levain to fully rise up, more than doubling. It could be longer if you're at a lower temperature, or it could be faster if you're at a higher temperature. Make sure to adjust and make sure to keep an eye on your Levain. When it's done, it should smell absolutely amazing and have numerous bubbles throughout. Now, this recipe is actually quite flexible. If you'd like to introduce some whole wheat flour into it, you can use whole wheat instead of bread flour here to make the Levain, which is one thing we've tried with splendid results. The whole wheat bread will turn out slightly smaller in volume, but the resulting flavor and texture remain delicious, and the added health benefits are very beneficial. So you may be wondering, why use Levain? Why not just drop in the starter? And the reason we're using Levain is so that we can control the sourness of the resulting bread, and also to ensure the quality of our starter. Okay, when the Levain's done, we're going to take a mixing bowl, scrape in 75 grams of Levain, add in 40 grams of water, drop the Tangzhong in, then 165 grams of bread flour, an eighth of a teaspoon of instant yeast, and finally we add 5 grams of salt. Now we want to combine everything into a homogeneous dough. It can be a little bit tough at the start, just keep going and keep mixing everything together. And we're going to keep doing this until the dough is well combined and more cohesive. Should take around 2 to 3 minutes. Once that's done, we're going to take the dough out of the bowl and work it some more. To start with, I'm kneading it the traditional way, just pushing the dough forward and folding it back, occasionally scraping it back to clean up. After it's a little stronger, I'm doing this sort of tossing down motion, and as we go on, you should notice the dough getting better and better, picking up more straps of dough and leaving the surface cleaner. We'll just continue working the dough for 5 to 6 more minutes or until the dough feels strong and looks smoother. Any more work on the dough done after this is probably going to start ripping it and leaving a sticky mess. So we're not going to push the dough past that, and instead we'll just leave it to rest here for 30 minutes. When that time's up, we're going to do a quick window pane test where we try to stretch it thinly enough to see light through it. I'm using a little bit of water to wet my hands here just to prevent sticking. And honestly, this dough does so well that I can use it to layer over my hand, which looks really nice. Still ripping a little bit, but it's already pretty good. And so we're going to directly move the dough into a bowl and finish up the rest of its bulk fermentation. We'll tidy it up a little bit. If your dough didn't pass the window pane test, you could knead it a little more before doing this. This time we want the dough to roughly double in size, which will take this dough about 1.5 hours here. Once it's doubled, we're going to divide and pre-shape the dough. Make sure to sprinkle the surface with enough flour to coat the dough. It can get a little sticky. After that, we scrape the dough out onto the surface. And using a scale, we want to divide it into 6 pieces, each weighing around 69 to 70 grams. Make sure to dust your hands and the scraper with flour regularly to prevent the dough from sticking. And once they're all divided, we're going to immediately pre-shape them into round balls. Quick and simple, circle around the dough, pulling the edges into the center and popping any large bubbles you see before rounding it in your hands gently. No need to get it too tight, this is just a quick pre-shape. When it's sufficiently rounded, we'll put it down. Now that they're all well-rounded and even in size, we'll cover them and let them rest for just 15 minutes. A quick bench rest so that they can relax and we can shape them with more ease. And when the time's up, we can shape them. We're basically doing the same thing as we did when we pre-shaped the dough, but this time we're degassing the dough more, kind of slamming it down and shaping it into a tighter ball. Making sure we get a nice and smooth skin, and again, popping any bubbles we see, especially the ones on the surface. Then once the dough ball is well shaped and taut, we want to transfer it over to a baking tray lined with a silicone baking mat and continue with the rest of the dough. When they're all done, we're going to let them proof for an hour or until they almost double. By the end of the proofing, they should look jiggly and fluffy, a good sign they're ready to bake. So just before we bake these, we're going to cover these dough balls in some egg wash. It's going to add some sheen and color, which will make them look much more delicious. Using a silicone brush, we're coating them pretty well in the egg wash. Not too much though, just enough. We're also going to top the buns with some sesame seeds, just sprinkling it all over. This is an optional step, but highly recommended because they make the bread taste so good. And they're ready for the oven. They're going into our already preheated oven at 180 degrees Celsius for 8 minutes at top and bottom heat. And then once you see the spotty parts on top, we're going to cover it with parchment paper and let it bake until they turn fully golden brown, which should take about another 6 to 8 minutes. And that's it, they're done. These are gorgeous little buns and they're soft with a beautiful inner crumb that's quite honestly perfect for sandwiches and hamburgers. It's a really versatile recipe and we'll just say that we're very pleased with how these turned out. Definitely worth working with Tangzhong, sourdough, and instant yeast. And that's it for this video. Thanks for watching and bye!